So can you guys hear me? Okay, great. So my name is John Linden. I've been in the game industry for quite a while. I originally started off on kind of the big publisher side or the big developer side. So I was a studio head at Activision for about 4.5 years, mostly in Call of Duty. So we spent a lot of time in Call of Duty and the beast that was Call of Duty. And then also did a Skylanders game in mobile. We did kind of a very innovative kind of physical trading card where you actually paid at the retail store with physical trading cards, which was opened up a whole amazing can of worms with Apple and Google, which I think is going to relate to what we're going to see with the crypto world. And then most recently, I've been at Seismic games. So we had a game called Marvel Strike Force was our most recent game. So it was a top 25 mobile game that came out in May, and then we recently sold that to Niantic in June. So really want to talk about. Actually, I have the wrong screen up here. How do I do this here? How do I swap over? If I can just drag, maybe. Hold on. I'm sorry. There we go. Put it here. Find my cursor here. This is gonna be fun. So really been watching the space for a while. As I mentioned, yeah, as John mentioned, I was one of the speakers in San Francisco, and it's been really fascinating to watch it develop so fast. I think the most encouraging thing is that we're all starting to use the same language, which is incredibly powerful, honestly. So I think we're there, and what I want to kind of talk through today a little bit is the concept of what we're seeing now with blockchain games versus how could all the rest of the games use blockchain, right? Because I think that's a very important distinction and it's something we should be watching. So I'll kind of preface this. There's probably going to be a little bit of realism here. I think that I'm a very optimistic person, but I think there's some realism that we need to discuss as well. So kind of jumping in this, obviously the blockchain core concepts, I mean, these are the ones that I love, is obviously transparency and trust, decentralization, token economics, and borderless payments. I mean, these are core concepts that we see in gaming all the time. And I think that's, again, some of this we've talked about many times already, but I think this is exciting because the core components of what these tech bases represent is really things we've been trying to do in gaming for a long time. So I think it's a natural fit. And one thing I love to say is that blockchain for games I don't think is revolutionary because gaming's not really broken. Like gaming is flourishing, right? So it's more evolutionary, and I think we got to think in terms of that, of not just reinventing something brand new because it's a long path to get there. But how do we evolve concepts that we want to build and concepts that we want to make easier and more cost effective and better for the users? So I think the current state of blockchain games, again, I think the one big thing you have to ask right now, and a lot of these games that are out currently, but not necessarily the ones that are coming, are they really games? If you take away the speculation of assets, is there anything left, right? And if there's nothing left, it's hard to argue that's a game, and that's a tight game loop. But I think we are starting to get there. There's some great games being announced, and we're quickly getting there in this industry. But I think overall, I think what we've established, this is a fun way to trade and collect digital assets, which is very, very cool. And I think the most important thing is the kind of psychology of the player has changed. And I think this is the most encouraging thing about blockchain to me, is really the concept of the fact that the players now are getting that asset, right? So I've done free-to-play games for a while. I know when you spend $1 on Spider-Man shards, I know what you're getting. You're getting personal satisfaction, and that wears off at some point. And then you get to go spend another $1 for more personal satisfaction. Versus we call it CryptoKitties, which was the first one, obviously, that kind of captured people's attention. I ended up finding I spent several $100s on CryptoKitties. Like I was just like, what the hell am I doing? But you have that mentality that it could be worth something, and I think that's such an important psychology that is fundamentally changing gaming. And I think that's a really, really cool thing that we haven't seen in other mediums for quite a while. So this is my biggest concern with blockchain games, right? Friction prevents the growth, right? And so right now, obviously, this is a problem, and we're not going to get too far with this, and I worry about this kind of becoming a niche industry if we can't solve some of these issues, right? So the fact that right now you have to go learn what a private key is, and then from a private key you have to go get a wallet, and then from there you have to go to Binance or Bittrex or one of the other exchanges and get some money, and then kind of get MetaMask installed and all that, right? That friction, as long as that friction's there, we're not going to dominate kind of the industry and get the massive amount of users over to where we want it to be. So I think this is something we need to kind of really focus on and get around. Now, obviously, there's some new ones. I don't know if you guys have seen EOS Links and their integration with EOS Bet. They're the dice game. Pretty fascinating. It's still a little bit of a challenge. You have to go create an account and all that type of stuff first. But we are getting better here. But I think this is kind of that realism, is that this is something we need to keep in mind, right? Is that CryptoKitties is definitely the kind of gold standard right now in this industry, but it's still small. And I don't know if I have the exact numbers right. This is the number I found, but even if I'm off by an order of magnitude, it's still not quite there. So 14,000 players, 2.2 billion players overall. So it's a small piece of the network, and we got to be careful that this doesn't become niche, right? And could stay niche with just blockchain enthusiasts. And I've also had some people that have said, well, yeah, that's all paying players. I agree. If you take the standard 4% paid on a mobile and 96% free, you're still only at about 350,000 players. And I'm not sure CryptoKitties would have necessarily cracked the top 100 on iOS or Android. So I think it's something we have to be cautious about, right? And I think we have to kind of keep watching, is that it is awesome and it's very cool and there's some great pieces here, but we're still very early and we're still playing in a very small space, right? And I think that's one of the things we have to be very, very cautious of doing here. So to me, the bigger question and the bigger piece is, how do we get blockchain into games, right? So how do we evolve traditional games and traditional loops to include blockchain, and what does that kind of mean? So I think the first thing that I love is really these kind of short-term trends, right? So one thing that you get, I'm sure a lot of you get the same thing, but when people find out that I work on Call of Duty, or I worked on Call of Duty, I immediately get 9-years-olds that come up to me and they say, when I grow up, I want to be a game designer. And while I love to think we have this massive generation of game designers coming, I don't think we do, because it's not as fun as when they find out making a game is a little harder than they think. But what I think we do see is we see this trend that people want a bigger stake in the games, right? They live in these worlds, they spend a lot of time in these worlds, and they do want a bigger stake. They want a bigger role. They want to have something unique. They want to have a way to make money. They want to have a way to stream, right? So these are big concepts that I think really, if we keep our mind on this, I think these are the short-term pieces we can really focus on. The second piece is really focused on assets on chain, to me, over currency in games, right? So what I mean by this, and I think the one flag that a lot of people have said is, our game's coming out in mobile in 2019. I don't know. When I was at Activision, we're a $60 billion company. We had this game, for Skylanders, which was a $1 billion a year franchise. We came out with this augmented reality physical card game, and Apple's like, no freaking way. We're not putting this game out, because you're bypassing our in-app purchase system. So what happened there is we had the luxury, obviously, of being able to go to them and say, okay, let's build this together. And most developers, I don't think, get that opportunity. But I think this is something we have to really keep in mind, is that if you're accepting cryptocurrencies as direct currency in the game, you might not get past any of the walled gardens, which is pretty significant. You have Microsoft and Sony on the console side. You have Steam that's kind of dominating the PC side. And obviously you have Apple and Google on the mobile side. So I think, to me, the focus needs to be more on assets on chain rather than currency on chain, right? So the idea is how do I use my traditional virtual currency and the things that are approved, and how do I buy in-app purchases to get virtual currency to then buy assets that could be also on the chain, right? And to me, that is something I think as an industry we can get through. Because now you're not necessarily bypassing these walled gardens, right? You're still, unfortunately, you're paying them their cut and all that, but you're able to get now access to the distribution that they're going to be able to offer for us to get to a very large amount of users. So I think this is a very, very key thing. The other one I think we have to be careful of is around assets on chain really have to be used with caution, right? And it's just with anything. Right now, if I could actually pay out somebody $1 and it goes to a PayPal account, but I could easily script in 15 seconds, I could script 10,000 PayPal accounts, and I could wire all that money into one PayPal account, you have a serious flaw in your game. You have a serious flaw in your loop, because you're now giving out real currency, and someone within a day will con the game, right? So I think this is something we have to be very, very careful of. And I think, again, this is why we've seen things like CryptoKitties, that you have to pay for every transaction, because you're giving out real value, right? And you have to be very careful that it doesn't destroy that game loop. So I think this is a very, very important piece that we have to keep thinking through as an industry, of how do we create these game loops, and how do we give enough value to the player to get that play pattern starting, to get that meta loop and the game loop kind of in full motion. So I think this is one thing we have to really watch for in the short term. In the midterm, I think these are the three areas that I really love seeing, and I think the ones that we'll see a lot of. Obviously, the skins economy, we're starting to see that already. I think this applies to most games out there, and I think that's exciting. So whether you're a shooter and you want a weapons marketplace, or you're a racing game and you want to have content creators and brands and things like that play in wrapping your skins, I think these are very, very exciting things. I think what's also exciting about this is that we can also retrofit existing games with blockchain tech to do this type of stuff, right? I think Alto's over here. There's a lot of people kind of looking at a lot of these type of problems, and that's exciting. Like having the ability to go into existing games to address some of these concerns using blockchain tech is going to be very exciting for kind of the midterm. Esports is another one I think is really fascinating. Having token-backed teams, I think this is a bigger one that we can definitely see a lot of games can do. Again, if you look at the Overwatch days, I think they started off teams there, which are obviously big franchise teams. They started off at $20 million. Now they're $35 million a piece, which is kind of crazy. But what if games can actually have kind of a token-based team structure within the game itself? That is something that we as game developers can actually build and control that. And I think that's a very, very interesting use of kind of games using blockchain in the interim. And then loyalty programs, I think, is also very exciting. We hear a lot about item interoperability, and I think I'm kind of somewhat cautious about that. I don't know, like with a 2D item, that makes sense. You can definitely do some things like that. When you get into a 3D assets and all that, there's a lot more that goes into it than just picking up that asset and put it in another game, right? For example, have you guys seen Borderlands? Who's played Borderlands, the game? Yeah, it's a beautiful game, right? It has a very specific art style. All that's done through a lot of shaders, some beautiful shader work and some beautiful lighting work. You suddenly take that object out of Borderlands and you throw it into another game, it's not going to look like it anymore, right? So I think these are things we have to be careful of with item interoperability. But loyalty programs, I think, are really fascinating. Being able to reward somebody with that, CryptoKitty, or with that Vigo skin, or with really any asset, being able to pull those people into your game and rewarding them with something, or even pulling parts of that, pulling a texture, or pulling some piece of that asset into something unique in your game. I think that's a very, very exciting piece that we can kind of focus on in the kind of the midterm here. So to me, these are the kind of the three areas that we should really be focusing more games using this type of blockchain tech. And then long term, I think a lot of us are talking about the same type of things. So I love that play to earn. I think that's a great acronym. I think what free to play was for mobile, I think play to earn is going to be for blockchain. So I think that's really exciting, and the idea that people can actually earn real income is definitely where we're going to go. But I think we're quite a ways out from making this happen. Again, I think the biggest problem is going to be the walled gardens. I mean, I think that's a long-term prospect that we have to kind of fundamentally change their mentality of how we work together. I also love the idea of having alliances, right? So again, in a mobile game, and even some PC or kind of premium games, there's a big ratio of free-to-play players to paid players, right? So and it's dramatic. Some games are 99% free, 1% paid. But what if you can actually start taking those paid players and having alliances with free-to-play players, which are an important part of the ecosystem, and it's a part of the ecosystem we can't really forget about because they drive so much of the game economy. They drive so much of the leaderboards and the competition and the teams and all those types of things. But what if we can actually, using blockchain, we can actually start creating alliances between the two, so that people that are paying money can start sharing money with people that are playing the game, because now you have kind of this alliance structure. And I think that's going to be a very exciting part as well. And then the piece we love as well is around the kind of being able to contribute your own works. We're starting to see some of this, obviously, with skins and things like that. But I think this is going to be a huge part to where players can now take ownership. They can have something unique in their game, whether it's a MOBA and they're a streamer and they want to have something unique that nobody else in the world has. So you start selling off angel wings in your game, and people can come in and customize those and make them their own with an NFT. I think these are very, very exciting things as well. And then the last one, which I think we're starting to see a little bit of, and I think we'll start seeing this in a big way, is really getting these games that are built from the ground up with player ownership in mind, right? I think this is a little bit longer for big games, million, 2 million player games. These things take a while, and I think that's one thing we talked about in one of the last sessions is this industry's only been around for less than a year, right? And some of these games, a Call of Duty, will take 4 or 5 years to make, and that's on a 15-year-old engine, right? So there's a lot of work to put these games in there. And I think we're still maybe honestly a year or two out from really having big games that are built from the ground up with this economy in mind, just because we haven't had enough time yet, right? But I think it's getting there. I think it's going to kind of drive a lot of these types of pieces. So I think, actually, well, I'm almost out of time. So I just want to kind of go through a couple, or just a last little piece here, though, is kind of re-emphasizing this, is that I think blockchain will definitely be a large part of gaming infrastructure. I think we'll see it in almost any type of game. You know, maybe narrative would probably be the weakest, but anything that's multiplayer, anything that's free to play, I think blockchain will become a bigger part of that gaming infrastructure. But again, we have to view this as an evolution and not a revolution. So thank you. That's kind of my slides here. Countdown here.
Okay, we've got time for some questions.
Sure.
So a quick one. So you had your kind of short-term, mid-term, long-term.
Yeah.
What kind of time frame is that in terms of months and years?
I think we're on a compressed timeline, which is great. I mean, short term, I mean, right now, again, this industry seems to have launched faster than any of them I've seen so far. I think if you look at the last trend in gaming, it's probably been mobile. You know, that was 10, 12 years ago. And we're moving much, much faster. So I think short term obviously is now, mid-term could be within a year. And I think long term is still, you know, I think to do it right, I think we'll see a lot of examples of this, and that's what's exciting about this space and the energy going into it. But I think we're still probably, you know, 2.5 years out before we start seeing some of those bigger concepts really play out in big games. That's kind of my take.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions for John? We have one here. Just wait for the microphone. If you can say who you are and which company you're with.
Yeah, I'm currently a student, so that's why and most of all a gamer. So I'm asking, as from a gamer's perspective, how is blockchain, at least people working on it, making it not seem like a scam in a way? I mean,
I think the most beautiful thing that can happen with blockchain. So we had a thing when we bought Candy Crush and King, right? And that was a different game for Activision, to where it's a different audience we didn't fully understand, right? We were predominantly a male 18 to 24, and suddenly we had these female, you know, predominantly female gamers playing this. And what was really exciting about that game is we had some research, and a lot of people didn't understand the biggest question we got from people that were paying in our game saying, how do you guys make money? This is a free game. And we're like, what do you mean? Like, you're paying us. And they're like, no, it's a free game. And we're like, you haven't ever bought anything in the game? And they're like, well, no. Well, except for that lollipop hammer. I did buy that one time, right? And what was fascinating about that is that they were participating in this free-to-play economy without really understanding what they were doing, right? They just had a value proposition, and they played, and it felt seamless to them. And that's what I think has been amazing, to get that many and that number of gamers into that genre. So I think we're going to have the same thing in blockchain, right? To where you shouldn't have to understand what's going on. You should just go get your race car, and you should race them, and you should suddenly modify it, and you have this great, cool spoiler, and somebody offers to buy it from you, right? So to me, I think that's the key, is you don't really need to have this in front, right, in the face of a gamer. You want 90% of them to not really understand. I mean, blockchain is a tech, right? It's not necessarily a way of life, even though a lot of us kind of view it as a way of life. It really is a tech, right? And I think that is important, is to make sure we keep it very transparent and keep the friction out of the user. Does that make sense? Okay.
Good. Any other questions?
Cool.
I have another one, actually.
Right.
I have one. Another one. I've got you here. So I guess you have experience of these kind of big multi-billion-dollar public companies. Apart from Ubisoft, who've been quite active and vocal about talking about blockchain, we've heard nothing at all from any of the other companies. Is that just because they don't say anything about things that might annoy shareholders and investors, or I mean, do you think there's a lot going on behind the scenes?
Well, it's funny when even at a company like Seismic, when we were looking, and I was like, we need to get into blockchain, like and they're like, are you kidding me? Like, there was, and these are like these guys from Pandemic back in the day. I don't know if you remember Pandemic, but they did Star Wars Battlefront. I mean, great games, and a lot of the feedback was just like, isn't this a scam, right? And I think that's something we have to overcome over time, but I think that's kind of extrapolated out. Now, Activision likes to play late, so speaking from the experience there, I mean, we didn't play in mobile until after Hearthstone, right? Like, mobile was like, meh, what's mobile, you know? And it was like a multi-billion-dollar business before they got serious about it. So I don't think they're going to play anytime soon, but we are seeing a lot of groups that are really thinking about it. The Zyngas of the world, the Niantics of the world, they're already starting to think about it. I don't think you're going to see, you know, Pokemon Go on blockchain anytime soon, but I think you are seeing companies that are really thinking through what the strategy is. So I don't think we're as far out as you might think, but I think you know, the EAs and Activisions are probably the farthest out. But the Tencents and all you know, the Asian companies, they're very aggressive about this, and they're very much thinking about these kind of trends right now. So I think it's going to get embraced quickly, honestly.
Lovely. Thanks, awesome. John.
Yeah, thank you.